Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. I'm Al Silverstein. I represent the First Ward, and it's a privilege to be here tonight and invite you to participate in our comprehensive plan process, which is a process that hopefully we're going to get more people involved in so we can understand how they think our community should grow, how much, how little, and this is one. We've had the third ward, we've had the second ward, now the first ward, and the fourth ward will be coming up June 2nd. So I encourage you, if you're not watching on Zoom, to come out and visit us in person. I'm going to turn this over to Lynn Thomas, who's our town planner, and he's going to introduce members of the Planning Commission who are with us this evening. Thank you, Lynn.
Thank you, Mr. Silverstein. Yes, we have our entire Planning Commission meeting, the entire Planning Commission membership with us this evening, which includes Talbone, who's in the back of the room, guiding folks in, William Ryle, Jen Dendinger, Vicki McAndrews, is that every? Philip Toussaint, and our chairman, Paul Weber, who is going to kick us off and lead us through the proceedings this evening. We also have, in addition to Mr. Silverstein, a couple of members of our town council, President Megan Cook, and hanging out in the back, Don Abatello, who just had his ward meeting last week. And I'd like to echo Mr. Silverstein's comments. If you haven't had the opportunity to participate in one of these yet, the Ward 4 meeting is next Thursday, June the 2nd. Yes, it's advertised as for Ward 4, but it's for anybody. So if you've not had the opportunity to come out to one of the other 3 meetings, we certainly anticipate having ample room for you at the Ward 4 meeting and would welcome you at that meeting. There'll be additional opportunities for public input as we go through the process. There will be, obviously, at some point, there will be the requisite public hearing, traditional public hearing, but we also envision what, for lack of a better term, we're calling a town hall style meeting at some point relatively soon in the process, which will be open to everybody in the community, residents, folks who work here, anybody with an interest in how the future of Easton develops. And we would like to make that an interesting, interactive meeting with a variety of options for providing your comments and input on things that should go in the plan. We'll get into more of that as we go along. One final thing before Mr. Weber kicks us off. If anybody in the audience, anybody watching on Zoom, either live or recorded, has not yet taken the public opinion survey, or the survey that we have in association with the comprehensive plan, we actually have 2. And when I speak again in a few minutes, I'll show you how to find that. It's on the town's website. These are 2 separate and distinct surveys. So if you took the first one, but have not taken the second, please come back and visit the site and take that one as well. And we also anticipate adding at least 2, I think, additional surveys that are a little more specific and focused on specific topics or issues. So there likely will be one on transportation and traffic, for example. Probably one on housing. Those have been among the 2 most significant issues on folks' minds as we've gone through these meetings so far. But more on that in a bit. For now, Mr. Weber, the chair of the Planning Commission, is going to kick us off with some opening remarks.
Well, thank you all for coming out tonight. First thing I want to do is ask you all, friends, neighbors, acquaintances, community groups, please, if you know other people, please ask them to come to the Ward 4 meeting. We're also going to have a town-wide town meeting on this. We've got the 2 surveys that are up. We'll have at least one, if not 2 more. We've only had 540 or 50 people respond to the surveys. We've got a population of 17,000 people. We've not had a great turnout in last week's meeting. Not a super turnout tonight. We're hoping we'll do better next week. But quite frankly, this is a plan that should reflect the wishes of our community. So it's our vision for the future. This is not a document that's written by the Planning Commission. It's not a document that's written by the Town Council. It's a document that reflects the desires of the community about how they envision the growth and development of this town. So let me tell you, I've been on the Planning Commission, I think 7 or 8 years now. These are the two most important reasons that I think to have a town plan that truly reflects our vision for the future. One is that every development project comes before the Planning Commission. The first test it must be is it's got to be consistent with the town's council. And that's the same test that the town council applies. So if it is consistent, it has a chance of being approved. If it's not consistent, because so it's very much a controlling document. The second reason is it is the Bible, if you will. It's the document we refer to whenever we develop any kind of a planning implementation tool, like the recently revised zoning codes. And I'll just give you one example. In our comprehensive plan, one of our major goals is to increase affordable and workforce housing. So when we revised the zoning codes, we made sure that we planned for denser housing, for buildings that could go out to the farther out on the building line. We also added multiple new multifamily housing types to encourage more dense housing. So it's things like this that we put into action so we can make changes in our town. So it is critically important that this document doesn't represent the thoughts of one or two factions in our town, but truly represents what everybody in our community thinks the look and feel of our town should be in the next 10 years. And I'm just going to give you one example that I heard at the meeting, the first board meeting that we held. And the person that came up to me said, well, I think the town is just growing way too fast. Look at this development and that development. And I said, well, as a matter of fact, we've only grown. We're now at 17,101, so it represents about 0.7% growth over the last 10 years. Guess what? We projected a growth rate of between 1% and 3%. So we're not even growing to the extent that we planned. So people need to be engaged. If they have thoughts or concerns about the community, they really need to come out, because this plan is something that I think is critically important for the future of our town. So we're going to do a couple of things tonight. First of all, Lynn is going to go over the survey. I think it's we've had 550
Right
responses.
around 540, give or take 1 or 2 to survey number 1, and just under 100 to survey number 2.
Okay, so 640, 650. Not a bad response rate, but again, when you compare it to 17,000 people, it's not what it could be. So we're going to share with you what some of the other people in the town are saying about growth and development and their vision for the future. And we're going to ask you what your vision is. Do you think they're spot on? Are they not? Or are there things that we haven't considered about the growth of our town that we should put on the table and have some deep thought about? So what we've done to encourage development is not only hold these town meetings, but we are also going to have 2 additional surveys and then 1 additional town hall meeting. But again, this personal involvement, I think, is critically important. So we're going to go through the survey, give you folks the results, and then ask your opinions, and probably ask you a few more questions about growth in general to kind of get you to think about what the future should be for the town of Easton. Lynn?
Okay, thank you, Mr. Weber. So first, a little bit of background. So If you're not familiar with the limits of Ward 1, here is from the town's webpage, interactive map of the first election ward in Easton. I think it's an interesting ward in that it has large areas, I'm guessing more than any other election ward, of non-residential areas. Part of that's because it includes the airport, but also commercial areas like Waterside Village, the industrial areas on the western side of town. So a lot of non-residential areas wrapped up in Ward 1. So before going over the survey results to date, just a little bit of background. I had this slide in explaining what a comprehensive plan is. Mr. Weber suggested maybe in the interest of time we delete the slide. Instead of deleting it, I just went through and highlighted some of the important terms that describe a comp plan, I think. So it's long range in focus. It looks out generally 20, 30, some communities even longer out into the future. But it focuses on the next 10 years. The life of the plan that's currently mandated by state law is 10 years to correspond with the census cycles. It's very future oriented. It includes a lot of goals, objectives, and policies on numerous growth related topics. It contains visions, an overall vision of the community, and then specific visions. And it addresses a lot of things, but primarily a comprehensive plan is a land use document. So it talks about the recommended future use of lands within the town and within areas that we envision to be part of the town. I think it's important also to note what a comprehensive plan is not. So it is not law in any respect. There are, as Mr. Weber alluded to, there are a number of planning documents, and not the least of which the zoning ordinance or zoning code, which requires consistency with the comprehensive plan. But the plan itself is not law. It's also not inflexible. It is rare, but it is possible to amend the comprehensive plan before we update it again. And that hasn't happened on a couple of occasions in my tenure here. It's not, that should be obvious, it's not all-knowing. However successful we might ultimately be in reaching hopefully hundreds, if not thousands of citizens for input, and as informed as that makes the plan, I'm sure inevitably something will come up that the plan does not anticipate. And it's not, this is sometimes confusing for some folks, it's not a master development plan in the sense of, it's not something you unroll and you can know that on this parcel off of Main Street, a duplex is going to be built, or this is where the new convenience store is going to be located. It's more general than that. A little bit about the current plan, the one we're in the process of updating. So it's exactly 300 pages in total, so it's not a short document. It includes 15 chapters, a foreword, 2 appendices, and 10 maps. And it contains statements of 46 goals and 185 objectives. So there's a lot to it. But here's the cliff notes. If you really want to boil down, this obviously is not everything that's in the plan. This is a good summary of at least the growth strategy of the comprehensive plan. So it includes strategies to contain sprawl or outward growth of the town in terms of its footprint, if you will, with something called an urban growth boundary. So we delineated a line around the town that is essentially as big as we ever envisioned the town becoming in the future. There is a recommendation to increase density so that we don't necessarily have to fill up that footprint as quickly. There is a discussion about, as we describe it, building neighborhoods as opposed to subdivisions or developments, by which, you know, a neighborhood would be more traditional, like closer to downtown, how it typically developed, perhaps a little bit denser, certainly not exclusively housing, and not the same kind of housing in a monotonous style. A variety of housing, maybe some cultural uses thrown in there, perhaps some small scale commercial uses thrown into neighborhoods. So you don't necessarily have to hop in your car for every need that pops up. This has been pretty consistent. So this is the fourth comp plan that I've been involved with updating, and this has been a pretty consistent theme, and it comes at both ends of the spectrum. So those folks who seem to come to those meetings and think, gee, Easton's really growing too fast for my liking, and those that say, I'd like to see a little more growth in Easton so we get more variety, et cetera. Both ends seem to support the notion that whatever we get, it should look as nice as it can possibly look and be appropriate for Easton and authentic to Easton. So that's what improved design refers to. And then the last bullet is one that was unique to the last comprehensive plan, and that was for the first time a mention of the notion of managing the rate of growth. Really, the current comprehensive plan does nothing more than say, hey, we have traditionally grown about 3% annually for the last 3 decades or so. It would be easier to manage that growth if it was closer to something like 1% annually. Seemingly not a lot of power, but as Mr. Weber alluded to, since we adopted the plan, we've grown at 0.7% annually. So maybe we have more power in the comp plan than I thought. Then 2 maps that really speak to much of the policy relative to land use in particular. One is the growth areas map. So the boundary between this green area, which is referenced as a green belt surrounding the ultimate limits of town. So that is that urban growth boundary I mentioned earlier. And I should note, this is very closely coordinated with Talbot County, who has done a similar thing for all of the municipalities in Talbot County. They worked with us 15 or 20 years ago to develop this, and if it's not identical, it doesn't vary by more than 100 feet or so, I would guess. And on this map, everything that is this kind of white milky color represents the current town, at least as it was in 2010. And if it has a red, yellow, or orange color, that refers to a priority for future growth. Red meaning most appropriate to be in Easton currently. Most of them, if you can figure out where they actually are already developed in Talbot County under their rules and regulations. Some of them, or portions of some of them, have come into town since this plan was put into effect. Most notably, at least a little bit, few of the parcels on Easton Point, which is a major focus for future development and redevelopment in town. The other map that's important to consider is the future land use map. So that shows what we envision, how we envision the land to be used in the future. And it is your traditional residential, commercial, industrial. We also, some of the hatched areas refer to redevelopment or mixed use areas. I mentioned the website earlier and how to find the surveys and information about the plan. So this is the town of Easton, eastonmd.gov. This is our homepage, and right on the homepage is a bubble that you can click on to get information about the 2023 comprehensive plan update. And that takes you to this page, which includes links to the first 2 surveys, both in English and Spanish. So speaking of the survey, so here I'll just relatively quickly go through the results, and then we'll follow up with some questions about these. So as Mr. Weber mentioned, the 2020 census indicated that the town of Easton population was 17,101. And so the first question I asked, in your opinion, do you think Easton's population is, and we asked, you indicate on the scale 1 to 5, 1 being too small, 5 being too large. And you can see that the overwhelming majority was right down the middle. I interpret that as the just right scenario or response. Next, similar question, but about the growth rate, and asked if, in your opinion, is Easton's growth occurring too slowly or too quickly? Again, the right in the middle was the predominant answer. There was a little bit more representation at the too quickly end on this one. Next, same sort of question, but this time about the amount of land that Easton consumes or occupies. And again, 61% indicate the basically okay, or it's all right. We then, there's a question that notes that future growth, there's 2 options for how we might grow in the future. You can grow outward on vacant green fields, farmland, woodland that's on the edge of town and develop that. Or we can develop on parcels that for whatever reason have been skipped over, and that would be what we call infill development and or redevelopment of various properties within the town itself. So we asked in this question, in your opinion, what should the percentage split between these 2 options be? This was an open-ended question, and people indicated a clear preference for more growth to be accommodated by infill and redevelopment, and they suggested percentages ranging from an even 50-50 split all the way up to 80-20. That was a common range. There were certainly singular outliers on both ends of the spectrum. Next, we touched on what has been from time to time a hot button issue in Easton, and that is the role of regional scale or regional level retail shopping in Easton, and asked, in your opinion, as of this moment in time, the amount of this type of shopping in Easton is, and again, from too little to too much, and again, right in the middle was the predominant, although it was a little more dispersed in the answers on that particular one. Then we asked an open-ended question to please list one thing, and I noted it can be a store, a restaurant, an employer, a recreational entertainment opportunity, really anything that you think is missing or underrepresented in Easton and that you would like to see added in the next 10 years, so over the life of this plan. Far and away, Trader Joe's was the _1 answer with 41 responses indicating Trader Joe's. A lot also Whole Foods, in fact, some combine the 2. Others that appeared frequently were a brewery, a steakhouse, a Costco. There were various assorted suggestions about different types of ethnic restaurants. Some people just generically said ethnic restaurants. Some actually suggested types. Affordable housing was mentioned. And then lastly, a publicly accessible waterfront appears frequently. So that was the first survey, highlights from the first survey. The second one got a little more focused, and it addressed what we call quality of life issues, and includes questions concerning our current growth strategy, the amenities that attract people to Easton, and the potential redevelopment of the current hospital site, assuming that a new hospital is eventually constructed. Some highlights from this survey include, so that we asked about, remember the bullets I said that summarized the Cliff Note versions of the comp plan. So we asked each one of those components of how people thought they, how appropriate people thought they were for Easton's growth policy, from 1 strongly agreeing with that notion to 5 1 strongly disagreeing to 5 strongly agreeing. And so contained sprawl with an urban growth boundary that had number 5 strongly agree was the most common response with over half. Another 20.7% agreed with that statement. Increased density, this one was a little more across the board. The most common was right down the middle, so I guess that's a neutral response, if you will. And then slightly more agreed with it than disagreed, but again, pretty evenly split on that one. The discussion I mentioned earlier about building neighborhoods as opposed to subdivisions, again, almost 60% strongly agreed with that, and another 25% agreed. Improved design, again, skewed strongly on the agree side. Restrict the rate of growth, this one a little more dispersed, but strongly agreed was the most widely supported. Second most was neutral, and then agree was third. Then we asked about various factors that we think people might associate with a community's quality of life, and asked people to indicate the degree to which you think each factor affects current residents in terms of a decision to potentially locate here. So either the reason they came, or assume someone is looking to come to Easton, and the reasons they might decide to or not to come to Easton. So the first amenity or feature was parks, and 57.6% felt that was a very important factor. The walkability of the area or the community, this had a strong, very important response at over 2/3. Housing variety, almost half, but not quite, gave that a very important rating, but another 32.6% gave it important. Housing affordability, so that rose to over half. I thought that was very important, and another 20% thought it was important. Shopping options, this didn't make the very important, but the important was the most frequent response at 39.1%. Dining options, same thing, 38% chose number 4 are important. Transportation options, so a variety of possibilities for how to get from one place to another besides just the automobile. Somewhat more dispersed, but skewing towards the important end of things, and the most frequent response was very important. The downtown, strong response, that was very important, 63%, and another 21%. So 84, almost 85% indicated the downtown is important. Historic character, 62%, thought that was very important, and another almost 30%, almost 23% thought it was important. Job opportunities, 57.6%, thought very important. And then a couple of open-ended questions. So we asked people to name one thing that the town should strive to add or improve in order to enhance this quality of life of our existing residents, for our existing residents. And some of the most commonly repeated responses, there's a strong theme for parks. So parks was the number 1, but also waterfront access, more trails. Some other things included more downtown parking, improvements to Route 50, affordable housing, it shows up again in this survey, and improved traffic flows / enforced speed limits on Route 50. Another open-ended question was, what is the most important asset, resource, or amenity for the town to protect or enhance as we contemplate the future of our community? And some of the common responses included things like maintain our small town character, preserve and enhance the downtown, the water and the waterfront, and build on and preserve this sense of community. Then we asked a question. I think this is a fun one. We've asked it a couple of times in past comp plans. We asked people to imagine that you have guests coming to visit you that have never been to Easton before. Name 3 places you would definitely be sure to show them. Downtown was the most common answer, with almost a third of the responses naming specifically downtown. The Avalon, the rail trail, parks, the Art Academy, historic areas generally, and the hills specifically, the Tidewater Inn, the courthouse, and Quaker Meeting House were among those that showed up multiple times. And then the follow-up to that is in one place that you will go out of your way to avoid showing them. Fortunately, some folks said none, nothing, or nowhere, indicating they were, pretty cool with whatever comes up in Easton. But those that did name places they would avoid, that included Route 50, Port Street, our shopping centers, and the old Safeway building. Then we asked, I mentioned at the intro to this about the hospital, we asked during the cycle of the 2023 plan, the hospital is likely, we think, to move to their new facility on the northern edge of town, resulting in a significant redevelopment opportunity right on the fringe of downtown. How should the hospital and its associated parking lots be reused? And we got a number of suggestions. Among those that showed up most frequently were some sort of mixed-use project. Apartments, sometimes just mentioned generally as apartments, sometimes specified as affordable apartments. A number of folks thought it was important to maintain some level of medical services within that building. Parks, again, shows up in this question. An art center, and a number of folks, some kind of educational theme, an academic institution or a school. And we asked, which of the following programs or projects would you support? But not just would you support this even if it resulted in a tax increase? And again, I think you see a strong support for parks and open space. The number one by 80% of folks was a waterfront walkway or boardwalk, but also among those with over 60% was additional passive parks, an expanded trail system, stream restoration projects. That's it for the survey results. If anyone should have follow-up questions or need to contact me on anything planning related, that's my contact information, my email and phone number. You're certainly welcome to give me a call. Just 2 maps very quickly. This is always of interest to folks. I think some recently approved projects in Easton. The yellow dots include residential projects and the red dots are commercial. Just to point out a couple, this is the Gannon Estates PUD off of Matthewstown Road. This is shown, I still haven't fixed this map. It's on the wrong side of Elliott Road. It should be right there, but that's a 120 unit apartment project that was approved at the intersection of Matthewstown and Elliott near the Giant and Walmart. These are 2 commercial projects on Route 50 to be built on the former Norris Taylor property, a new Burger King and a second Royal Farms in Easton. Most of the others that show up in red are various industrial or office type projects. And finally, here is a map. This is a blow up of that future growth areas map showing this is where we are. And I put this at the end because it might assist in the discussion and questions to it. So, take it away, Mr. Webb.
So we'd like to make this a dialogue. Did you have a question? Sure.
Can I bring your microphones?
I'm just curious, on some of those maps, there's a fairly large rectangular area on the north side of town that seems to be not included in the town limits. Can you explain what that is?
So I believe what that is referencing,
Shift it up.
I can't move this, but I can go all the way back to the, so on the ward map.
Was on the Ward 1 map.
Yes, so this is area that is not in town. Obviously, you can't be in Easton Ward 1 if you're not in the town of Easton. So that is, it's largely the Gannon Home Farm, or that's what I've known it as historically, in the vicinity of the airport. So there's the airport and the road. It's just north of that. It is identified as a future growth area for the town, but it is not currently in the town. And it's practically, but not quite surrounded by the town. It would be illegal to cut it off. So there are, despite how this map looks, there are connections out to Talbot County. I think it's probably right through a thin corridor along Route 50 right there.
So is it Talbot County?
Yes.
So could Talbot County develop that?
So they could apply to Talbot County. I don't know what Talbot County's zoning rules would allow for that particular parcel. Obviously, they could develop more intensely, more densely, perhaps with more options if they annex and develop under the town of Easton rules and regulations. But yes, they don't necessarily have to do that. They could develop in the county. Obviously, there is an advantage to coming into the town, primarily in the form of being able to hook up to our water and sewer system that you can't do unless you annex.
So I want to go back to the beginning of the survey, and let's just have a dialogue for a minute. So most of the respondents said that the current population and the growth rate was just about right. What do you think? Is that square with what everybody feels about the town?
I feel that little growth adds a little zest to the economy, but I think that it can't be run amok and has to be considered, and I guess that's part of the goal of the conference, to capture that generation. And I was wondering, what does a 1% growth rate look like? I mean, how many houses does that mean, and how many businesses are added? What does 1% look like?
That's a good question, and obviously that'll be detailed in the plan itself. We'll project out that, if we grow at 1% at the end of this planning period, this is what that will translate into in terms of population. But to do math on the fly, which is probably not a good idea, 17,000 people, we're just over 2 persons per household, so that's about 8,500 households. Then what 1% of that would be 85 to 100 new residential units a year. That would be roughly what a 1%, at least for the next year. It's compounding, so it will grow a little bit over time.
I don't know how long all of you have lived here, but the last 10 years, has it felt about right? How do you feel about traffic, shopping, schools? And has it been this growth rate been uncomfortable? Is it comfortable? Is it okay?
The traffic is definitely worse.
Yeah, I'm speaking as a resident of Ward 1, not as a planning commissioner. Not as a planning commissioner, but as a resident of Ward 1. So I'm just curious if the information on population growth that's been broken down into demographics. I'd be interested in seeing how the age has changed and ethnicities have changed. I don't know if you have that information or if it's possible to see that.
So I have not seen that yet. I think it must exist at least a level to allow us to consider redistricting, which would be registered voter age and above. But I haven't seen the breakdown, and I'm not sure the schedule for release of the various products. I know it was recently announced it'll be delayed. Great news. But it's not as bad as it used to be. So it used to be if you didn't have census data right now, you had to rely on the 2010 data. The census at least now does the American Community Survey, which is, for lack of a better term, an approximation of the census. That can give us some insight into that.
I know, Lynn, town council, President Cook can tell you, we have gotten some census data that has shown growth in some of the wards. We know that depending on the neighborhoods, we've seen 55 plus population grow. We've seen the Hispanic population grow in our community. We've seen the Black population go down some. What used to be the fourth ward, which used to be the minority ward, now between the first ward and the fourth ward, there's almost parity. So those are some of the numbers we're starting to see. And the council's going to have to take a look at that, and we have to come up with some decisions. And we'll be working with our town attorney to do that.
Regarding new election board members.
Correct.
So one of the questions in the beginning of the survey talked about land use. So there's a correlation between growth and use of land. So using Lynn's rough numbers, if we keep at approximately 1% growth rate, which is what we had this last decade, we could be looking at anywhere from 800 to 1,000 people. Is that fair?
Rough on the fly math, yes.
So maybe 400 or 500 households, and where do we put those? So we have this yin and yang with land. So to the extent that we want a 1% growth to continue, that may mean that we need to use more vacant land to support that growth. So what's your thought now if you add that additional layer? Yes, we all seem to be comfortable with 1%. Are we comfortable with more vacant land being used to accomplish that?
One of the things we might want to think about is the fact that we're being approached for more apartments, which does take up less land, but gives us more population. And taking a look at what you have talked about, which is we have some people who have built small houses at 600 square feet, different designs. So, we're looking at more and more, especially in the fourth ward, there are proposed projects that are going to be taking existing land and redeveloping that land. And I think that's something that's real positive.
So higher density. I was actually going to get into a second question, but I'll jump into that now. So to the extent that a 1% increase in growth over the next decade will bring in around 1,000 new people, how do you feel about that land use, instead of it being vacant land, is infill development within the core of our town, indoor redevelopment? So some areas, and I'm thinking about some tracks along rails to trails that may not be fully utilized, but could support some dense multifamily housing. What are your thoughts about that?
Well, I'd like to just differentiate something. When you say vacant land, do you mean agricultural land? Do you mean land that is forested? Or do you mean bare land which is derelict in town? Say a lot that has no housing on it between two other houses that once upon a time it had a house that burned down. And I'd just like you to speak on what the vacant is.
Well, I'm going to chip away at your question. So the last component in my mind are the infill development, which would be vacant lots in and around the core area of town. If you look at priority growth area 2 and 3, I think some of that is open land right now, it's farmland. I'm not sure if it's all being actively farmed, but it is open. There's also some wooded lots that are in area 2 and 3 that could be prime for development. And then there's also larger tracts, not huge, but larger tracts of land in and around town. Again, I'm thinking of the rails to trails boundaries, borders that could be redeveloped. Would you agree with that? It's mostly vacant or wooded in area 2 and 3?
Predominantly, yeah, if not totally, yes.
So
Yes.
I think it's important to speak about the difference between a wooded lot and a vacant lot as per either a farm field or a vacant lot in town, which isn't wooded, because we really need to preserve the tree cover and enhance it as much as possible. That adds so much to the quality of life and the livability of town that we really need to be careful not to be cutting down wooded lots.
So we need to turn back to our math wizard and ask, over 10 years, what does 1% growth look like?
I think that what Len was estimating somewhere between 800 and 1,000.
So
For
per
all
year,
10
not-
years.
Over 10 years.
Yes, for 10 years.
But that's not just a flat 8,500 a year. I mean,
Right, so over 10 years.
it's compounded. But it's compounded, so quite a population increase, so that's something to imagine. And that would put a lot of pressure to put high density housing, using up every square inch of whatever property, whatever lot is used, and then that means then one of the charms of Easton tree coverage, having woods and wooded lots, and just being able to see green when you're out about town. So maybe 1% for 10 years, in the course of the comprehensive vision of a comprehensive plan. I think that's a little too much. I think part of it is helping us to try to imagine what that looks like.
And by the way, all the housing that's proposed for development may not be dense housing. It could be single family homes on large lots.
Yeah, but I hear that, some of the questionnaires came back saying, we need more apartments for affordable housing.
Yeah, I was going to ask, in that same vein, how do you decide what percentage of new housing availability is rentals versus home ownership? Seems to me like in a town like Easton, we would want to encourage home ownership, which means affordable housing that families who work in the area and live in the area can afford to live in and have their own, as opposed to having a bunch of apartments or rentals that tend to deteriorate or not really hold their value, if you will, or add to the ambiance of our town. So it's hard to understand how do you decide that, what percentage are affordable small homes, if you will, that people can afford to buy and have pride in, or just a bunch of apartment complexes where people are just renting.
So excellent question, and that's part of what will be considered in the comprehensive plan. One of the required chapters now, this is the first comp plan that requires it, although we already have it, is a housing chapter. So that will certainly consider that in other questions. And we are actually, with the assistance of Midshore Board of Realtors, we're looking into possibly obtaining a grant to do one or more surveys on different aspects of our housing needs. It might help inform that chapter and answer questions like that. And personally, I think the short answer is at this current time, there's a need for housing across the entire spectrum in Easton. That's part of, and it's not unique to Easton, obviously. That's part of what's driving the housing affordability issue. But yes, looking into that, and it's not going to be the same answer for all parts of town. Some parts of town have a disproportionately high rate of rental properties, and others are predominantly home ownership. And you know, it's weighing that balance and coming to recommendations about that and other such things.
Yeah, I just want to add, I can understand your concern with rentals and being in what your typical apartment complex would be. But you know, there are rentals that are done in good quality as infill, urban infill, which I think would be favorable to the whole development of the town. If they're high quality, they would be desirable places to live, and they would help the ambiance, as you say, from the downtown. So you know, I wouldn't throw out rentals as the, you know, your typical developer's apartment complex. So just that comment. And then if I can go on again, I see that Easton is pushing toward a more urban environment, is what I see it as, and I think that's a positive thing, because that maintains more of the natural lands around it, the rural lands. If you can accomplish growth within obviously a higher density environment, urban, and then actually promote the urbanism, the favorable aspects of the urbanism of it. And I just quickly listed a few things that you can think about. What it involves is a higher density of housing, and that would include apartments and rentals, more multi-use, and less dependence on the automobile for the downtown, more development of public transport, a more walkable community downtown, and smaller scale retail, which is actually integrated with the housing, which would be very closer to a multi-use environment. So, you know, if there's any, just throwing those things out to think about, because they're coming to my mind as I sit here. So,
Well, what do you all think about that thought? I personally, when I moved here, I bought a Midtown house because I didn't want to be in my car. I wanted to walk every place that I went, and that's what my wife and I do. Is that a point that we should push in this plan, that to the extent that we have this growth, that we try to contain it as best as possible within the core area of town, be it infill, be it redevelopment?
Oh. I gotta be I chair the Historic District Commission, so we get a lot of these questions on this concept, but it's difficult because I think we have a lot of potential in the downtown to have that multi-use, which you're talking about, but because of codes and things like that, it's a huge challenge. But we just have to work hard. I don't know if it's through grants or whatever, if we can just work through it to be able to utilize more of our downtown area in that mixed use capacity. I think it would be absolutely wonderful. Because we don't have, maybe I'm wrong, but I don't see a ton of infill lots. I know we have some in different areas, but I feel like we've got to work with what we have. And then maybe there are some areas within the historic district and that we actually do need to look at sort of a redevelopment, but do it right and do it keeping that same charm of Easton. And because we do have a lot of rental properties that are just disintegrating and falling apart, and we don't have the ability to do anything about it. It's very frustrating. It's not fair to the people who live in these properties. It's just, and we could do so much more with that area. So that's my take on it.
Good, thank you.
Mr. Weber, one of the things that I hope we can do as we go through this process is make sure we get with more millennials and find out what their thinking is, because as I look at information across the country, millennials are not necessarily looking to buy houses, but they are looking for good rental property, and because that gives them mobility. And I think, that's a portion of our community that we need to make sure we reach out to and we touch as we move forward. And as far as the rentals, I think the last number we saw was 42% of our housing in town were rental housing, down from about 48%. And I live in the same neighborhood as Ms. Pizar does, and we're seeing a number of our houses around us being sold and fixed up finally. And that's very encouraging. And I think that with the historic district, with the planning commission, with our building inspectors and everybody else working together, we can help get a rebirth in our downtown area.
Important point about the millennials, Al. So that's from what I've read about that particular demographic. One of the other things that could play into our planning thinking is they are one of the demographics who, for whatever reason, are attracted to downtown living in a way that previous generations have not been for quite a while. Two particular demographics seem to be driving that right now, and one of them we certainly have in spades. That's the baby boomer generation, and the other is the millennial generation. They want to be downtown, perhaps for different reasons, but both want to be downtown. And we have long talked about, and you'll find in the current plan, probably the previous plan, policies and goals and objectives to support, for example, upper story condos or apartments in downtown. We even had a grant program a number of years ago funded by the state Department of Housing and Community Development for upper story rehab. But for reasons Ms. Pizor mentioned, it is tough. The building codes are very restrictive for when you take, well, as you can imagine, for what used to be either totally vacant space, and now you want to allow people to live there. That's a much higher standard suddenly comes into play, and thus it becomes very expensive, shall we say, challenging to be able to pull that off without some substantial assistance.
One other thing I want to mention, and we need to look at it for the plan. The state of Maryland has passed legislation to plant trees, and I mean millions of trees. And it's a very aggressive plan, and we should take a look at that and see how that works in with our comprehensive plan and how we can work with the county. If we can't plant them in town, how we can get them planted around town and around the county.
Start to make that green belt green.
So let's switch gears for a minute. I heard someone, I think was the woman in the back with the microphone, mention traffic. What do you all think about traffic? So we've had this 1% growth. 50 is nightmare. What do you think about traffic? So let's put that layer on top of population growth. What are your thoughts? Jen?
Thanks, Paul. I think that it is somewhat difficult to navigate around town in the middle of the day and maybe around 5 o'clock and also Route 50, but otherwise on Sundays, there's no traffic unless you're out on Route 50, even on the weekends. I would say as a person who likes to walk around town, the walkability in town is difficult. There are intersections where I'm routinely almost mowed down and I'm walking in a crosswalk. So I think part of the challenge is making sure we have enough crosswalks to look authentic when we talk about our walkability and promote more walking spaces to let folks know who are the traffic in the cars. This is where walkers can go and this is where cars can go. I do think there are little hot spots around town. I don't know if maybe changing some roads to one way might help with that, but I don't, which is controversial, but I don't experience much traffic issues in town, it is Route 50 is the challenge. But a lot of that is outside of our community. It's the crossing of Route 50 that we have the biggest challenges.
Some people have also mentioned problems navigating east to west, so not just north, south on 50, but getting from one eastern part of town to the west or vice versa. What are your thoughts?
Having recently relocated here from New Jersey, I keep looking around and saying, where's the traffic? I don't see any traffic.
It's all relative.
Yeah, I know. But what's interesting is, I was at the workshop for Ward 2, and that seemed to be their biggest concern was the traffic. Living in Ward 1, I don't really have any traffic concerns. I think, Jennifer, what you say about walking downtown, it could improve. I mean, there's some, it could improve. But in Ward 1, I mean, my biggest traffic is getting across St. Michael's Road to get into Target from whatever, Harris Teeter, and that's wait for one light. So I don't feel that at all. And that's probably just unique to Ward 1. As I said, Ward 2 was all about traffic and their problems.
So are you trying to say if we had a field trip, took all the Easton residents to New Jersey for a week, they think that this was nirvana?
Perhaps. I do.
Well, I think you're right, Bill. The problem on Dover Street, and Goldsboro Street, especially at 4:30, 5 o'clock at night. Recently, we went out of town for an event and we went through 3 light changes on Dover Street. But remember, it's a 300-year-old plus town, and the way the streets are laid out, which means that people need to slow down a little bit and enjoy what they're passing by and seeing. It's not the same, and we don't have the option to widen those streets because the houses are right on top of the sidewalks.
I just want to add that I think that the traffic conversation and the affordable housing conversation are good to pair, because the part of the reason for the dense traffic downtown is that a lot of those people can't afford to live in our community where they have their jobs. And so they commute from Federalsburg, from Caroline County, from Queen Anne's County, from Dorchester County. And so that causes more traffic in the town. If there were more affordable places to live, maybe it's multifamily housing, maybe it's duplexes, but it's a difficult place to have a job that is not a fancy, high-paying either government job or a lucrative industry job, and also afford to live in the same community where you are.
So now that Jennifer brought that up, affordable and workforce housing was a hot topic in the last plan. Personally, we all think it should be a hot topic in the next plan. Would you agree?
Yes.
Nobody disagrees? Okay, so Outside Magazine, I don't know whether any of you read it, good magazine in case you're interested in something to read. But they did a survey and published the 10 best towns or cities, I forget which, to live in the U.S. So I wasn't so much interested in what the cities were, because I'm not going to move again. But I was interested in the criteria. So why did they list them? And you know what? The number one criteria, well, actually 1 or 2 criteria to get on that list was the amount of park space that your community had, and 2, related, the proximity of that park space to the residents. So key criteria, keep in mind, other than old people like me who read it, Outside Magazine is probably geared to a much younger community, probably the millennials that we're all talking about. So what do you think about that? Do we have enough park space? And is it located close enough to where we all live? I happen to live across from the park, and I'm over there all the time. I don't know, how do you feel about that?
I think in general, we're pretty good with park space in Easton. You know, there's several large parks. I think our best gem of a park is underutilized because it's not really visible. I'm just thinking about the RTC park. And I think, you know, the idea of developing the waterfront, Port Street is going to enhance a lot. But I think in general, the park situation is pretty good in Easton.
Any other thoughts?
I disagree. I think we need more parks on the other side of it. So I think we're great. I agree with you on this side of 50. We have plenty of parks and nice ones, and the rails to trails I love. But it would be so nice to have, for those of us that live on the other side of Route 50, off of like Dutchman's and Matthewstown and areas around there, it would really be nice to have parks that are closer to where we live, and we don't have to cross the Route 50 to get to them.
What about rails to trails?
If we could connect rails to trails, I think that would be great. If we could keep on going and connect rails to trails over there, we were going to be able to connect it to Easton Point.
We'd have to build a tunnel under 50.
I know, it would be really difficult, but I mean, it's going to be difficult to get over 322, but that would be a state issue. With, you know, if there was a way, it would be great to even, or just pick up, maybe not cross over, but actually pick up over there as well.
Any other thoughts about parks? All right, one other area I want to broach with you. There's a lot of people that say that what's critically important to them is the character of Easton, the kind of look and feel, and that has different meanings to different people. So we have a certain expectation on the western side of 50, so west of 50, about the architectural style of the buildings, both residential and commercial, and a different standard in my mind on the eastern side. So you see more what I would call typical suburban developments. Yet when you read our comp plan, the current one, it says we want to try to avoid that. We want neighborhoods that connect, that are walkable, that don't look like cookie cutter homes. So do you think that we should continue with this kind of a dual standard? One applies to the west and one applies to the east? Or should we be more, well, the right word is forceful, but more adamant about the architectural design features of the buildings that get built primarily residential on the east side of it?
I think one aspect we have to think about is affordability. And depending upon, as you know, some of the developments that have been built on the west side, now you're starting at $500 to $1 million, and others are 370, 400,000 to 500,000. And the problem is we don't have anything in the middle, and that's the challenge as we move forward. And we talk about that all the time. The question is, how do we fix it?
Now, are you saying that that's the price of housing on the other side of 50, on the suburban side of? Oh, okay, and there's a big missing link there in terms of a range of housing prices. Well, and then I guess the original question was, should we continue to have a kind of a bifurcated planning? And I just want to say, I'm voting for, how do we, making an attempt to integrate both sides of all like one town. It just feel, when I first went through that area, it was just really surprising to me. I thought, where is this? it was the Christmas lights. Our first mural here 2 years, and going around looking at the neighborhood, seeing Christmas lights, and I just was astounded by all of the streets on that side and how many houses were over there. But I didn't know that you want the Easton.
Well, having lived on the other side when I first moved here, because very frankly, in 2000, we tried to buy 6 houses, got outbid, and ended up in Hank Corbin subdivision, Stony Ridge. And those subdivisions were very affordable, but they were basically boxes, houses put together and looked like boxes. They didn't have trees in the front, they didn't have boulevards, things like that. And now those houses are $300,000 plus houses as they're on the market, as the market has grown. And the challenge is, we all like great design. It's how much does it cost for that design? How do we figure out a way that we can get the great design, but on the other hand, make it affordable enough for a family, a young family, to be able to move into it?
That, we have some great examples with, like you were saying, like Cook's Hope and Easton Village, and Montgomery County where we used to live. We have the Lakelands, the Kentlands, which were beautiful. And Mr. Silvers, I have to disagree with you. I don't think quality and appropriate architecture needs to be expensive necessarily. I think that's an excuse that builders give or something. And I do agree. I think we need to have some consistency, because if I was a young family who wanted to live in Easton, couldn't find something in the historic district, let's say, or somewhere else, but I want to live in a neighborhood that had that same sort of character, walkability, availability of services that would make it a neighborhood and feel like you're in Easton. So I think that's actually an interesting point that I had never thought of until you mentioned it, that we really do have two sorts of Eastons. I think we're losing the character with one of them. I think that holding builders to a standard of some sort of character and design that's consistent with Easton, that is historically appropriate, or at least consistent historically, would be interesting to see.
Thank you. Any other thoughts? Yes, ma'am.
So one of the challenges, I think, in that discussion about price versus quality, is when the motive of the developer is purely for profit. And so if we're especially, in thinking about affordable housing, and another piece that we might think about is affordable senior housing, as our population ages. If we couldn't think about some other types of models that are like a, public-private partnership, or something where you can, get a nicely designed living space that is affordable. I mean, it's not an impossibility. It's just, I think the profit motive makes it nearly impossible.
So we certainly don't want to overstay our welcome. So I do want to bring this to a close. Are there any other planning issues, any other concerns, or maybe something that we missed? What other issues do you think should be on our plate?
I'm going to say it again, trees, because I have lived in this town for a very long time, but honestly, I turn corners and suddenly, this big, vast expanse of sky that used to be tree cover in certain areas, and I mean, it just, in the summer, and then you have all the pavement that's just absorbing heat, and we really need to, encourage, trees, maintaining the tree cover that we have and enhancing it. And that means on commercial properties, on private properties, and on public properties, not just on the parks, but in all the spaces. We need to figure out ways to encourage and enhance the tree cover.
Thank you. Any other thoughts? Phil?
Yeah, I would just look to see how we can encourage positive support of different ethnicities. What that means, I mean, diverse ethnicities. I mean, Easton has a rich cultural history. Well, maybe not a perfectly positive one, but just how not to lose that and to invite other people into town and keep it rich.
Any other closing comments?
I just have
Sure.
to tag on to what you were just saying. Within the historic district, we've been kicking around the idea of sort of, rather than have the entire historic district looking the same, really emphasize the cultural areas and allow different parts of the historic district to reflect the culture and make that an important thing. I just wondered what people's thoughts are on that. Well, like say on Dover Street, where we had a section of Dover Street and one of the buildings was painted the very bright blue. And at first people were like, our rules allow that because that building had already been painted, so they are allowed to paint it. But I was down in Richmond and there's an entire area where they've gone for it. They've allowed bright colors and, we thought, maybe we're missing something here. Maybe this is something that we really need to embrace within the historic character. We're looking at allowing murals, not something that can be attached to the brick, not painted onto the brick. But, we're looking at a lot of different ideas. So we're always open to hearing what people, but I just kind of thought, I think Easton might be ready for sort of these pockets, really emphasize the hill. We're trying to do, the town's doing a lot of redevelopment there. We're trying to, get things going. So we want to embrace our historic area, and maybe it's time to sort of have different feelings in different areas of this historic area.
Great idea. Okay, thank you all for coming tonight. Again, my personal plea, reach out to your friends, your neighbors, colleagues, whoever, your faith groups, any organization. We need to get more people involved, and somebody mentioned about millennial involvement. Most of the meetings I've been to, it's folks that are older. So it's hard to say, but it's not a very ethnically diverse group that have come out. So I am certain that there's other people that live in this community that have specific ideas about what our community should look like in the next 10 years. So we need to hear their voices. And also, please do the survey if you haven't done it. There's 2 up. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Appreciate it. Small in number, but a great discussion.
Excellent discussion.